So to get started, this masterclass is all about the job interview. And some people get so afraid and so scared and cringe when they think about getting ready to go into a job interview. So I want to set your mind at ease and give you some tips, tricks, strategies, best practices that you can use when you're even thinking about getting ready to go into a job interview or even starting the job search and knowing that that is part of the process. So hello and welcome. If we have not met yet, I am Dr. Tracy Schroyer, and I am the host of the Career Development Club. I'm so excited to have you here. And please feel free to let your friends and connections know about the Career Development Club. Love to help people who are looking to get into their desired jobs and empower them to do that, as well as helping those who are looking to grow professionally. So for this masterclass, we're going to dive into, like I mentioned, the job interview process. The first thing I want to talk about is really understanding the interview process. So employers need to do interviews to figure out who is a good fit. And they typically go in, and the process is they post a job out there. They have zillion and five candidates that come on and send. I've heard hundreds of applications coming in very quickly on a lot of jobs, especially in this job market today. And they need to assess those. I want to say quickly, but it doesn't always happen very quickly. And sometimes they lose out as a result of that. But they need to assess the qualifications, who may be a good fit for the company, for the team, for the role, all of those things, and who has that potential that they're looking for. And sometimes they might feel not qualified enough and push those off to one stack. They might find people that these are qualified, this is who I want to talk to. And they may put people in the other column, which is overqualified, where you may have more than enough of the qualities that they're looking for, which really kind of burns when you're trying to find a job and you know you could do the job really well. But they think that you may get bored or you may not be challenged enough in the role and move you to that overqualified role. So then they take this qualified individuals typically and they look and they kind of figure out, okay, who are the top X number? So maybe they pick the top 5 or 7 or 10 or whatever that number is and whatever the capacity they have to do these interviews. They bring those individuals in and whether that's in person, whether that's virtually. Typically, a recruiter will do a phone screen, not always, but typically, to ask a few questions and to get an idea if you, the person interviewing, would be a good fit for the role. And from there, they would determine, does this person go on to the next round of interviews? And most of the time, that's with a hiring manager. It could be with more than just the hiring manager. Um, it could be individuals on the team. It could be peers of the hiring manager. It could be the hiring manager and somebody above the hiring manager, people in different areas that you may work with. It could be a myriad of different situations. But typically you would be brought into that interview where the hiring manager typically is and asked about situations. You would be asked behavioral questions. So tell me about a time when, those types of things. This could be individual, it could be panel. So you kind of have to be ready for whatever that might be. I think it's a little bit more stressful when you think that it's more than just one person sometimes, but it can also be just as stressful if it's going to be that one person and it's that hiring manager and you feel like you really have to knock their socks off and impress them. Some of the phone screens, some of the interviews that happen are extremely informal and some are extremely formal. So I've seen from one end of the spectrum to the other, even in my own experience recently, as well as some of my clients' experiences. So being prepared and kind of reading the room, even if it's a virtual room, kind of reading the room, the personality, the formality of it or the informality of it, and kind of catching on and seeing and mirroring that to the best of your ability. So it's really important to make sure that you prepare. There have been several interviews in my past where I did not prepare. And I can think of one time where I went in, I had not really prepared. I thought I'm good for this role, like had this ego thing going on, and I went in and I bombed the interview. So later on, somebody was like, I knew you were a good fit for this role, but what happened in that interview? And so it's always important to make sure that you're preparing, that you're practicing, whether that's on your own, being able to answer. Some people video. There's a lot of different applications where you can kind of video yourself, get some feedback from a coach, or, look back on that yourself. You can also do it with another individual. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a coworker, colleague, whatever that might be, virtual or in person. Maybe your manager can help you if you're going for a promotion, something like that. But it's really, really important to make sure that you're prepared and that you're not, as much as possible, that you're not thrown off of your game when you get in that interview and you get asked a question that might be more of a stumper. So if you are not already part of that company, make sure that you're researching the organization that you're going to be interviewing for, that you know as much as you can publicly about that company and even that division specifically, if you're able to dive that deep into the publicly available information out there, that you have a good understanding of the role. I know sometimes it's hard because what's published in the job description may be a little bit different, could be also very different from the role itself. I did have a client recently who was very much studying the job description, picking pieces apart, looking at what skills align to what different bullet points in the job description, being able to ask knowledgeable questions about the different pieces of the job, and was able to find out too through that with some of those job roles that they didn't mean exactly what they had put in there. So some individuals in HR, whether it's the recruiter, the hiring manager, they may copy paste from job descriptions or change a couple of things. So it's not necessarily like these are the commandments for this job description. This is what it will be. It's written in stone. It can be very loose. So you definitely want to understand the job description enough so you can ask questions, you can dig a little deeper and understand what the expectations are for that role. You also want to make sure that you practice your responses, and getting feedback is invaluable to this, to make sure that it sounds coherent, that it sounds like it's valuable information, that it makes sense, all of those types of things. So making sure that you have the opportunity. So I have a couple tips for you when we think about the interview process. So one is researching the company and the role thoroughly so you understand the values and the needs of not only for that team, for that role, for that organization as well. Practice answering common interview questions so you feel more confident and prepared. What's really cool is you can do an internet search and do common interview questions for somebody applying for and then list the role, or common interview questions for somebody applying for a job at X and it's a certain company. You could also use AI, artificial intelligence like ChatGPT or Gemini by Google, and put in some things to get some ideas of what kind of questions might be asked of you and how you will go about answering them. There are some organizations that have very formal ways of interviewing, and you're able to typically through those searches gather that insight. The other great tool that you can use, this resource, is glassdoor.com. So if you go to glassdoor.com, you can click on an interviews section, or actually you look up the organization first. If it's a big enough organization, they likely have an interviews section, and you click on that. And people who have interviewed with the company, whether they have not gotten it or have gotten it, they tell you what the role was they were applying for and what the pros and cons, what some of those, you can find some of the questions through that. So that is a good opportunity and a resource that you can use. And then also make sure that you prepare questions to ask the interview so you demonstrate your interest and your engagement in the job role as well. You should never, 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 let me repeat, never go into a job interview and not have at least 2 to 3 questions ready to ask. Yes, the people that are interviewing you may answer those during the course of your conversation. But typically, if you have at least three, I think for one job, I had like 15 and I had to prioritize them before I got on the interview. So if I only had X amount of time, like these are the top five that I would want answered. And then as I went through the interview, I was able to cross off as they answered them. So I knew that I didn't have to ask those questions. So those are some tips for you as far as the interview process. The next thing I want to talk about is articulating your strengths. And one of the ways that you can do that is by using the STAR method. So give me a yes in the comments and let me know if you have ever heard of the STAR method for interviews. All right, so the STAR method, the S in STAR stands for situation, the T is for task, the A is for action, and the R is for result. So this method helps you to answer those behavioral questions. So one of the things that I had done when I practiced, I prepped for interviews, and so did a couple of my clients, is used the STAR method to identify what is a skill that they're going to ask me about. And then what examples do I have to explain that skill and my use of that skill using the STAR method? So what was the situation that I was in? What was the task or, what was I asked to do? What was the action? What did I actually do? And what was my part in it? And then what was the result? What was the outcome? And sometimes the outcome isn't great and you learn from it. Sometimes the outcome is awesome and things worked great. So being able to really break that up and identify that. What I had done is for different job roles, I identified at least 5 of the top skills that I would need. And then for each of those 5 top skills, I identified a different example and used the STAR method and wrote down and broke it out and identified that for those. I could use the same role, but I use different examples, but I also tried to vary it up and use different roles. For some of you, if you've been in your role for a very, very long time at the same organization, it makes sense that you would stay with examples that are within that role, within that organization. Whereas if you've had a couple different jobs in the last 5 to 10 years, I would try to break it up and think of examples across those different jobs that you could bring to the table. Also, think about your examples and what they show the interviewers or interviewer and the quality of the answer there. But try not to use as much as possible using the same situation, the same exact example for all of those different skills. You want to make sure you have a bit of a variety there. So the other thing I want to talk about is, so tailoring your strengths and taking a look at my notes here. Make sure that you tailor your strengths to match the job requirements. So again, I looked at what are the top 5 skills I would need for this job role so that I can figure out, okay, for those skills, what are my strengths and what are my examples that I have for each of those? That's not going to be the same for every single role. You're going to want to look at the job description. You're also going to want to look at the type of role to make sure that you're aware of what that might be so that you can get organized. And this is why you really need to prepare, because even though it's a project manager in this company and maybe it's a project manager over in this company, you want to see, are those top 5 skills the same that you would likely use? Or is one involve something maybe a little bit more, and you may want to have a different type of skill that you're talking to. So maybe it's more of a senior project manager and there's something additional. So always, always, always look at the job description to see what stands out and what they're looking for so you can talk about experiences and situations and be able to provide great examples to showcase your strengths, your skills, your experience, and why you're right for the role. So I want to give you some tips about articulating your strengths. So some tips for this is using specific examples from past experiences to be able to illustrate your strengths. You can have notes written down and list a ton of different details. Sometimes you really have to, again, read the room virtually or in person to see like how much information do I give versus how much do I do this kind of high level? This is where I've experienced this, and this is what I did, and all of these pieces. The next thing, tailoring your strengths to match the job requirements and the company culture. So, what makes the most sense for you to think about, talk about, prepare for? And then also practice delivering your responses in a clear, concise, and confident manner. So, the more that you practice, the more comfortable you're going to be when you're in that interview and having to answer that question when it comes up. I'm not going to say practice makes perfect, but it makes progress and it will make you a lot more comfortable. The next thing that we're going to jump into is answering common interview questions. So sometimes we get the common interview questions, and drop a note below and let me know what are the common ones that you've heard. So I will share at least one, maybe two with you. So one is tell me about yourself. And one of the ways that people go wrong in tell me about yourself is they start to go through their entire resume, their entire past leading up to today. That's not exactly what the interviewers are asking for unless they ask for that specifically. So there have been some companies that have asked, clients of mine, "Hey, take me through your resume specifically and let's walk from here up until today." If they ask you that, that's what you do. If they say, "Tell me a little bit about yourself," what you should have prepared is thinking about what are the major skills that you have, the experiences and the strengths, and what do you bring to the table with those skills. So think about, in this instance, what are the top 3 skills, and be able to tell a story about what you're bringing to the table and how that is going to be beneficial for the role, for the team, and for the organization. So, uh, sorry about that. So making sure that you're focused on how are your skills going to benefit, like I said, the role, the team, and the organization, and even as high as the industry. So think about what are those top 3 skills that you want to talk about and how can you highlight and telling the story about how those can be beneficial. The next thing is making sure you discuss strategies for structuring your responses. Um, Pause. Another question that a lot of people prep for, and I have not gotten a lot of in interviews, and I don't think a lot of other people have, but you do want to definitely be prepared, is what are your weaknesses? And if you are asked what are your weaknesses, what you want to do is be able to talk about something that maybe you struggled with, it was a challenge, but you have overcome it. And this could be something in the last 6 to 18 months. And what did you do to make sure that you overcame that? So you can talk about this as a weakness. It's really more of an opportunity, and you were able to take steps to overcome it and end up doing much better and turning it into a great opportunity. So if you were to get that question, yes, you definitely want to be prepared. I have not heard that from a lot of my clients or the interviews that I've had myself. So when you go to respond to interview questions, of course, you want to make sure that you have the STAR method available for those behavioral type of questions. Tell me about a time when kind of thing. And you want to make sure that you have relevant examples. So typically when you go to create your STAR method for the different skills, I was able to figure out not only for maybe those 5 skills that I started to create the STAR method for and jot those out, but I was able to think of a lot more examples. And so I was able to jot those down related to different skills so that if I did get asked, maybe they're not in the top 5 that I think are important, but I would still have that on a piece of paper. So that was kind of top of mind for me. So again, you want to make sure some tips for you using the STAR method, going back to that situation, action, or situation, task, action, result to be able to structure your answers. You need to make sure that you are honest and you are authentic in your responses. Make sure that you're focusing on relevant experiences. Don't tell stories about things that are not true, that are not accurate. One thing that I've heard in the past is some individuals, when I was hiring contractors a long time ago, would talk about a project that they were part of. But what they didn't tell until later on when they were hired is they actually had one little piece in that bigger project. They weren't in charge of the whole project, or they didn't have the scope, a bigger scope within that project. It was that tiny little piece. They failed to say that in the interview. And even though it got them hired in, because the assumption was, shame on me, I learned what questions to ask, is that they had a bigger part in it, but they weren't really openly honest in saying what their piece was in the whole thing. So make sure that you're honest and you're authentic there. Also, showcase your problem solving skills by talking about challenges that you've overcome in the past. So you can think about, if they do ask you about what are your weaknesses or what is a weakness of yours, if they don't, or if they do, you're more likely than not to get asked about tell me about a time when you faced a problem and how did you overcome it, or what did you do? And they're looking at what's the logic in the steps that you took to overcome whatever the challenge was, or to solve whatever the problem was that was out there. So next I'm going to go into handling challenging questions. So a challenging question can really throw you off guard and make you start to sweat and fidget and not know what to do. The first thing that you need to do when you're asked a question and you're not quite sure what to do is take a second, breathe. I have had the ability in interviews to say, let me think about that for a second, or let me think about that for a minute. And then I'm thinking, and either I have something from there I can share with them, or I have also said this, can we pass and come back to that question? Like, I'm struggling to come up with something at this moment, but if we can come back to it, like, that would be great. And the interviewers have been perfectly fine with that. You absolutely under no circumstances want to say, I have no idea, I don't know how to answer this question, anything like that. So whether you need a little bit of time, like, to kind of gather your thoughts and come up with what your answer might be or your example might be, or you ask for them to come back to that, that's perfectly fine. So let's see, you want to, for these, any kind of challenging questions, you want to be honest, you want to be positive, you want to focus on the lessons that you learned. So if somebody asks you about challenges that you've had with a manager in the past, the last thing that you want to do is talk about what a jerk, all these other names come to mind that I don't want to say here, but all of these other things that you want to call that person, or you thought of that person, or all that kind of stuff. But you need to make sure that you stay positive and that you talk about, yes, I had a challenging time with this prior manager because of, and what's factual, because of a reason why. And then what are the steps that you took to try to work through that with that manager or peer or whoever that might be? And what did you learn afterwards? Would you change something and do something different? Would you have, if you were in that situation again, what would that look like? So, what was the outcome of it? Whether it may have not been so positive, we weren't able to figure things out. I ended up going to another area, or I moved to another team, or something like that, or we agreed to disagree and, like, we didn't work together on the specific project, or whatever that might be. You still respected that person, and in the future you understand, like, what are some of those things that maybe you need to look out for. So these are even more important to practice and prepare for, because you will be thrown off and you'll be flustered and you can get really upset, especially if it starts to trigger a memory of something that wasn't so good that had happened, or something that really did challenge you in the past. So these are really, really important to make sure that you're practicing. And you want to make sure that you stay calm and you're composed when you get these challenging questions. If you need a second to breathe, to take that breath, or, think about, how you're going to frame that, what you're going to talk about, hopefully in that prep and that planning that you have done that. And maybe you have some notes written down about that. But again, make sure that you're staying focused on the positive aspects of your experience, even when it's something challenging. No name calling, no dirty talking about like whatever it was that happened or the memories or anything like that. Um, and use these types of questions as opportunities to show your resilience and your adaptability. And what are some of those lessons that you learned coming out of that? How did you grow? How are you going to change or work differently if you encounter something like that in the future? So those are the big things to think about if you get those kinds of challenging questions. So drop a comment below and let me know if you've ever gotten a challenging question in an interview, and if you're open to sharing what that challenging question was. I would love to hear that as well. All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is making a lasting impression. So something that is very important is your body language. This is even true if you're on a phone interview where they cannot see you, because you can typically your body language comes out in what you speak, the tone of your voice, the inflection, all of those pieces as well. But more so if you are on a virtual interview or in person, you want to make sure that you have eye contact. And it's really important to, if there's more than one person, that you're making eye contact with the different individuals on that call or in that room, so that you're talking to not just one person, that hiring manager, but you're talking to all of the individuals in there. You also want to make sure you have good posture so you're not slouched in your chair, like answering it, or have your feet up on a desk or something like that, that you're keeping a good posture. Typically, when you're leaning in, it shows you're interested in, whereas you're leaning out, you're not so interested in. So think about that too. You don't want to always necessarily be like leaning in though. And then any gestures that you make. So make sure that you are maybe not using your hands too much. But as you can see throughout this masterclass, I'm even using my hands to talk to you, but that you're using appropriate gestures and the number of gestures and different things like that. You also want to make sure that you project your confidence, and there's numerous ways to do this. Not only your confidence, but your professionalism. So smiling and the eye contact can show confidence. A firm handshake, and even if you have to practice that, that's a good thing to be able to practice with other people. Really shows and exudes your confidence. And a lot of those things we talked about before, your posture, the gestures that you make, really help with that as well. Make sure that you are genuine and that you're enthusiastic about the opportunity. If you are not, it's likely going to show right through in everything that you say and that you do, or a lot of what you say and that you do. And somebody's going to pick up on it, and you're not going to be chosen for the job. And maybe that's the best thing if you don't seem like you are really enthusiastic and genuine about the opportunity. So pay attention to your body language. Make sure that you maintain eye contact, that you smile. Typically, when you smile, if you can see, like from what I'm doing now, people can hear that in your voice as well, and there's an excitement about it. Make sure that you dress appropriately for the interview, because that shows real professionalism. If you're not quite sure how to dress for the interview, you can ask the recruiter when you do a phone screen with them and they say, we'll let you know if you're on to the next round or whatever. You can ask, like, if you're going to be virtual, it's typically, hey, let's wear a nice blouse or a nice shirt, and have your hair done, makeup if possible, and just look nice and clean. If you are in person, that could be very different depending on what type of job that you're going for, the people that you're working with. Typically, you would not necessarily go in wearing jeans, but again, it's something that maybe you want to talk to the recruiter about if you're going in person. But most of the time, it's nice slacks, a shirt, unless, depending on the type of industry or the type of role, a suit or a dress may be necessary. So just make sure that you're looking at those things. Maybe you're doing a little bit more research, talking to people. Definitely leverage your recruiter to find that out as well if you're questioning what that might be. And then making sure that you're showing your genuine enthusiasm and your interest in the role throughout the interview. A lot of times that comes across in those nonverbals, as well as kind of going back to what we said originally about the questions that you ask. And that shows your interest in the job role, the organization, the industry, like what you would be doing. And it can show you really putting yourself in that job role by the questions that you're asking. So, the next thing that we're going to talk about is storytelling within the interview. So, storytelling can make you so much more memorable. People engage with you, they can connect, they can relate to you. So, when you think about, especially your STAR method examples, think about how can you tell that in the way of it's telling a story about what happened, and how would you walk through that, and practice makes progress and comfortability, being able to tell that story of that situation that you were in. uh, you can also make sure that you um, practice to make sure that your answers are more compelling, that they come across genuine, that they're understandable, that they're relatable, um, that they are relevant to the job, to the skills and the experience. You don't want to talk about something that's way off in left field versus what the question is being asked or what you're trying to portray. You can use details and examples to make your story engaging and make it memorable. You want to make sure that you're being cautious of what you can share and what you can't share, especially if you're interviewing at another organization and maybe there are some projects you worked on where you can talk about working on the projects, but maybe you can't talk about the details of the projects. So be cautious of that. But as long as you practice telling them in a concise and a compelling manner, the interviewer or the interviewers can always ask you questions for you to be able to provide more details. And be cautious of the time that you have as well, and making sure that you're not going on and on with one example versus, what is sufficient enough that you can share in a couple of minutes to answer that question, be able to take any additional questions and then move on to the question that the interviewer has. So lastly, I want to cover here follow-up strategies. So drop me a note, drop me a yes if you have followed up after an interview. This could be a phone call, this could be an email, this could be a snail mail, whatever that might be, a LinkedIn message. But drop me a yes and let me know if you have done that. Would also like to know if you're open to sharing. What method have you used or methods have you used? So it is really important to send a thank you email after the interview. What you want to say in that email is your interest in the position and thanking the interviewer or the interviewers. When I had multiple interviewers, I think there was 4 in one interview phase that I had, I sent an email and I sent it to the recruiter and I said, can you please send the below to this person, this person, this person, this person. Maybe I didn't have all of their email addresses. And then below I put, just I'm really interested in this role and I see my skills of X, Y, and Z being a good fit for this role, this team, to help make the organizations even more successful. I appreciate your time and look forward to the next step. Like as easy as that. So email is typically the go-to for most people. If you have already connected with them on LinkedIn, it doesn't hurt to do that as well, or in the place of the email. Some people are not on LinkedIn as frequently, so it may not be something that they see quickly enough. So email would probably be the go-to. Snail mail doesn't happen as much as maybe it used to before because we have that email to use. You can absolutely use it, but again, time is of the essence to get that thank you out to them. So again, you want to make sure you're concise, a thoughtful thank you note, Make sure it's personalized, specific to the interview, if at all possible. So if there's something that you talked about that you were really interested in based on the interview, or that you felt that you brought to the table really well, you can call that out. It doesn't have to be this standard blah, blah, blah thank you note. Like, put something personalized that will help them remember you and help you stand out as well. Um, and if you haven't heard back from the employer within a reasonable amount of time, you can reach back out and reiterate your interest and ask for any update. So, some individuals I have talked to that have had a phone screen or have had a second, third, fourth interview, I've talked to, and they're like, well, yeah, that was 2 weeks ago and I haven't heard anything. And I was like, did you reach out to the recruiter? Did you reach out to the hiring manager? Typically, the recruiter is that person to open the door for you. And they're like, no, I don't want to feel like I'm bothering them. But if it's 2 weeks out and you don't have an update, you are more than welcome to go in, and you've not gotten an email to say you're not being considered anymore. You can go to the recruiter and say, hey, this is so and so. I had my second interview with the hiring manager on X date. Just wanted to check in, see if you needed any additional information, if there's any updates. Like, as easy and as simple as that. Um, and typically once a week, unless the recruiter has specifically said there's going to be a different timeline. So, say you finished your interview and the recruiter reached out and said, hey, we are considering you, but there are, maybe it's a company shut down for a week, or people are on vacations, and it's going to be 2.5 weeks until we get back to you. Don't reach out a week later and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, I haven't heard from you, because the person already told you. So be mindful of that. You also don't want to be reaching out multiple times in a week. Reach out the once. If they don't respond to you, wait another week. Typically for me, if it's 4 or 5 weeks out and you've not heard anything, it's kind of let it go from there. Um, so again, the sending the thank you email, typically within 24 hours of the interview, using that thank you note to reiterate your interest in the position, talk about any key points from the interview, and follow up if you have not heard anything within the time frame either they provided, or I would say within a week and a half, 2 weeks from the last interview time. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions about anything that we talked about in this masterclass. I am going to be wrapping it up here in the next minute or so. I want to make sure that any of your questions are answered related to the job interview. And hopefully, by walking through a lot of these pieces, it doesn't feel so heavy and so scary as maybe it did before. One of the big things has been preparation, preparation, preparation. And if you're interested, drop me a note, drop the word STAR below if you want a copy of. I have 2 examples for where I use the STAR method for 2 different skills on a Word document, and you can have that. I can share that with you, and then you can also be able to duplicate it or empty it out and put your own in there to prepare for any job interviews that you have. But that was a really nice tool to help me prepare, and I've also given that to some clients to help them as well. So if you're interested in that, drop the word STAR in the comments, and I will make sure I message that out to you. With that, I thank you again for attending this masterclass. We talked about the interview process, what that typically looks like. We talked about articulating your strengths in the interview process. How do you use the STAR method? Think about relevant examples and experiences. We talked a little bit about common interview questions and how to react to those and how to work through those. We talked about handling challenging questions. Remember, take a breath if you need to. If you are struggling, if you need extra time, you can say, hey, can we come back to this question a little bit later? Those types of things. We talked a little bit about how to make a lasting impression. Talked about storytelling and the importance of that in the interview process, and making sure that you prepare, you practice. How do you tell that story, especially with the STAR method? How do you go through that and tell that as a story? And the different things related to follow up. What are some of the strategies to be mindful of and cognizant of after the interview has happened? And hopefully, this information was extremely helpful for you, even if it's just a little bite that you took away from it. I would love for you to drop in the comments and let me know what was the most helpful thing from this masterclass that you heard today. And again, any other questions, anything like that, I welcome you to post in the comments. I also want to share and make sure that you're aware of a new product that has come out from Career Compass, which is the company, career coaching company, and that is called Start with a Spark. So one of the things I've heard from a lot of mid-level professionals I've worked with, and I've done a lot of LinkedIn optimizations, and I'm also certified in that, is on LinkedIn, which is a professional networking platform, not just a place that you host your resume and your profile. A lot of individuals are like, you're telling me to post on LinkedIn and to try to post consistently. Um, I don't know what to post. I don't know what to say. I don't know what would be helpful. Like, I don't want to look stupid, all of those types of things. So, I want to introduce you to Start with a Spark. And this is a 3-month, it's a quarterly calendar with daily topics for you to post about on LinkedIn. This is specifically for mid-level professionals. And so each day you have a topic that you can post about on LinkedIn. And there's also for every day, there are prompts. So if you're not quite sure what to say or how to start it, there's a starting prompt for you for each of those days. So a no-brainer, really. 3 months of available content that you can post for every day on LinkedIn, or even starting with once a week. But for you to be able to receive this, the price right now for this is $7.77. Again, a no-brainer for this 3 months of content. So if you're interested, I'll drop the website in the comments towards the end of this masterclass or even after. The website is site, .tracyschroyer.phd.com backslash spark, SPARK. And I'll drop that in the comments if you're interested as well. But it's really a helpful piece, a resource to really encourage you and spark your ideas and your thoughts to get posting more on LinkedIn. The benefit of posting more on LinkedIn is you're showing up in individuals' news feeds on a more regular basis. So you're staying top of mind to other people, especially those potential employers or individuals who are aware of jobs that you might be interested in or opportunities to work on projects, to speak, all of those other types of professional opportunities that may be a good spot for you. So I'll drop that below. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I will see you all later. Thanks.